Asante sana, Madam President.
Tanzania. Kenya, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, we are looking for our document. Maybe you could move to the next country with your indulgence. Thank you.
We'll move to the next speaker, which is Malaysia. Malaysia, you have the floor, please.
Sorry, Madam President, I was discussing with my colleague. I didn't hear you call us, but we call for our turn for the topic of corruption. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now I'll give the floor to India then. Kenya is ready?
Yes, we are.
Okay, India, sorry.
Please accept
Kenya has the floor
our
now.
apologies for that. Distinguished delegates, just to make some observations on the item, the agenda item. Kenya is a party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and continues to participate in international meetings in this regard to the best of our capacity. Kenya recently effected a new law that aims to curb the risks posed to health, safety, or the environment by foreign flagged ships calling at its ports. The merchant shipping port state control regulations commenced in January of this year and allows the Kenya Maritime Authority to inspect vessels and take such action as may be necessary to ensure that they are not hazardous to safety, health, or the environment, and to detain vessels or suspend services until compliance standards are met. The issue of piracy and armed robbery against ships at sea off the coast of Somalia, as a number of states have noted, remains of grave concern to Kenya. Acts of piracy have continued to adversely affect fishing, tourism, and shipping industries in the East African region, and this has significantly contributed to the increase of the cost of goods and services in our region. The resurgence in piracy at sea has prompted Kenya to intensify the range of efforts to tackle this problem. Our parliament recently amended the Merchant Shipping Act and the Penal Code to strengthen our capacity to address piracy within Kenya's territorial waters and the high seas. Kenya welcomes and commends the efforts made by the international community, particularly those states who have partnered with Kenya to combat piracy. These efforts have had a deterrent effect on piracy and armed robbery in our region and resulted in the reduction of piracy cases on the Indian Ocean. Distinguished delegates, we have identified several legal issues that we believe require more consideration under public international law, such as the use of private armed security guards, the use of force and transferring of suspects for trial and imprisonment, collection of evidence at the high seas, and submission in courts, extradition, and jurisdictional issues. Delegates, we note that under international law, any country can prosecute piracy on the high seas. In practice, in our experience, Few countries do so unless their national interests at stake, and many suspected pirates are therefore released without trial. However, Kenya, together with other states in the region, have taken steps to prosecute and incarcerate pirates. However, we face challenges of capacity, particularly congestion in our prison facilities. Distinguished delegates, Kenya is in the process of reviewing its law on piracy to include all crimes committed at the high seas. To this end, we shall seek to consider best practices from member states who have more experience in addressing this problem. We urge all states and international organizations to further enhance international efforts in this regard. I thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. India has the floor now.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, let me thank the Deputy Secretary General for the report which he presented. That report was very comprehensive and very useful, and we compliment the ALCO Secretariat for that such a report. As you know, India, we have very vast coastline, and we have so many islands in our possession. So given its geography, India has a very traditional and very abiding interest in the oceans. UNCLOS of 1982, we consider it as a constitution for the ocean affairs. And we became a party to it, and also we become party to the implementing agreement and also the fish stocks agreement. Also, we are party to the 1982 SUA Convention. Given the time constraints, I will quickly go through a few points. Many speakers have spoken about the piracy. I would like to inform that India, of course, has taken a we share the concerns expressed by many of the predecessor speakers, and we have actively participated in the contact group meetings and its work. And also, as many of my predecessors have expressed, that about the legal framework for the punishment and suppression of the piracy and robbery, armed robbery at sea. We are trying to bring new legislation. Right now, it's the advanced stage of preparation. So, it will provide a necessary legal framework for prosecution of suspected pirates and armed robbers at the sea. And we consider that oceans play a very vital role in supporting life on Earth. The outcome document of United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development held at Rio de Janeiro in June 2012, entitled The Future We Want, recognized oceans and seas as an integrated and essential component of Earth's ecosystem that are critical to the sustaining it. Only through proper management and use of ocean resources, we could preserve and protect marine environment. The oceans are facing a numerous challenges, including the illegal, unreported, unregulated, the so-called IUU fishing, deterioration of marine environment, biodiversity loss, climate change, and those relating to the maritime safety and security, including acts of piracy. In our view, oceans have a significant potential to contribute to the energy needs, to improve economic well-being, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, while the marine renewable energies offer opportunities, they also pose environmental and economic challenges, especially for the developing countries. The effective and unhindered functioning of institutions established under the UN Convention UNCLOS, namely the three institutions: International Seabed Authority, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, Commission on Limits of the Continental Shelf, are the key to achieving goal of fair and equitable use of oceans and their resources, including through the effective implementation of the provisions of the Convention. We note with satisfaction the progress made by these institutions in their respective areas and support all efforts towards ensuring smooth functioning thereof. Lastly, I would like to mention about the fisheries. For a great for a greater number of countries, fisheries is a very important thing for their socio-economic sector. For India also, the fisheries sector is very important. We support the concerted efforts of the international community towards achieving sustainable fisheries inter alia by adopting measures to prevent and combat the illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, by effectively implementing the fish stocks agreement and the relevant instruments at the regional level, and by preventing overfishing. We consider the role of Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is very crucial in conservation of fisheries, resources, and management of the development of fisheries. With this, I thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity.
Thank you, India. And with that, India was the last speaker on my list. With that, we come to the end of the agenda item relating to law of the sea. And now we will move over to the next agenda item, which is on challenges in combating corruption, role of the UN Convention Against Corruption.
We have to invite the three experts to the table, and we have to request the DSGs and Madam Vice President to
Okay.
go there. I'll get the cards of the experts.
We have three panelists for this session. They are Mr. Manoj Dwivedi, who's a director in the Department of Personnel and Training in Government of India. Mr. Kenichi Kiyono, who's a deputy director, UN Asia and Far East Institute for the Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders, Tokyo. And Mr. Nimesh Jani, regional anti-corruption advisor, UNODC. I would request the Deputy Secretary Generals, they already left the podium. We'll just wait for a few minutes and we'll start the session. And I invite the panelists to come on the podium, please. Manoj Dwivedi. पहले कौन बोलेगा?
पहले DSG.
Okay.
इसी ऑर्डर में बोलना है ना.
Okay. Okay. I'll request Mr. Feng now to introduce the subject.
Thank you, Madam. Honorable Madam President, distinguished panelists, honorable ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce to you the report of the Secretariat on the subject contained in our call /52/headquarters New Delhi in brackets /2013/SD/S11 that gives an overview on a number of meetings in the context of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption that have taken place in 2012. Madam President, we all know how important and at the same time difficult it is to fight and curb corruption. The battle against corruption has not only become more urgent, it has also become more obvious as the extent of its reach is growingly apparent in different parts of the world. Not only does corruption impoverish economies, threaten democracy, and undermine the rule of law, it channels terrorism, organized crime, and human trafficking, etc. These far-reaching consequences clearly indicate that the war against corruption cannot be fought at the national level alone. Corruption is without doubt a problem of international interest as it touches developed and developing countries alike and respects no borders. The UNCAC is a product of the heightened consciousness of corruption as a growing and indiscriminate threat. On the global scene, the UNCAC, which attempts to create global anti-corruption standards and obligations, is the most comprehensive anti-corruption instrument available. The convention provides the framework and tools for the states parties to advance their work on prevention, criminalization, asset recovery, and international cooperation, as well as technical assistance. These 5 areas are divided into separate chapters